Studio. I'm joined by Julie Lenarz, Executive Director at Human Security Centre, and Maajid Nawaz, Chairman and Founder of the Quilliam Foundation, who's advised the government on counter-terrorism as well. Julie Lenarz, did we contribute to it? Have we created the monster?
No, I don't think that we have created the monster. I mean, you made quite clear in your introduction that hundreds of terrorist attacks predated the wars that we fought in Afghanistan and Iraq. I mean, you can certainly make the argument that some of the decisions that we took made it easier for groups such as Islamic State to take advantage of people. But I think to bring this all back to our foreign policy would be actually very dangerous, because you would then go down the route and say you let these religious fascists dictate the foreign policy decisions that we take. And let's be very clear, whatever we are going to do, whether we say we intervene or we don't intervene, they will always find a way to spin this. If we intervene, they'll say they come to our lands, they kill Muslims, and if we don't intervene, they will say, look, Bashar al-Assad, can slaughter 300,000 Muslims, West is sitting on their hands because they don't care about Muslims. They will always find a way to spin it in their favour.
Maajid Nawaz, do you believe that this convulsion of Islamist fascism that we are seeing is just another convulsion of fascism, and it happens to be Islamic in this instance?
Well, it is another wave, another phenomenon that has engulfed the world, like Nazism, Italian fascism, and Soviet communism before it. However, it does have a particular colour, which is important to remember here. As you correctly said, and as your previous guest has said, this has an Islamist theocratic bent to this fascism. The reason that's important to keep in mind is, as with Nazism, if we wanted to treat Nazism, we had to defeat it not only militarily, but also recognise the ideology that underpinned it and entirely discredit the appeal of white supremacist Aryan ideology. Likewise with Soviet communism, nobody today who's an angry young teenager and may have, any number of grievances becomes a Soviet communist revolutionary hailing Stalin. And if they do, they're incredibly rare. I'd like to meet such a person and laugh at them. But likewise, we have young angry Muslims and non-Muslims today who are actually converting to this particular theocratic ideology, which means we have a task ahead of us, a generational struggle, in fact, Muslims and non-Muslims together, to not only defeat ISIS militarily and its symbols and its various leaders, but also in the long term challenge this Islamist theocratic ideology by working within communities to undermine its appeal. And that's the real work here, and that's the work I fear that we are very, very far behind in doing.
Dr. David Lowe, are we far behind on that?
Yes, we are. There's still a lot of work to do. A lot of work still has been done, and certainly over the last couple of years, a significant change of emphasis in this. But this leads us on to our prevent strand of our contest policy, the counter-terrorism policy. And I totally agree with Maajid there that, that there's a lot of work to do, but it's getting down to this level. It's break this extreme narrative that's being espoused all the time. I mean, I mentioned before when you cited Newt Gingrich. That just plays into these extremist hands, and they use this and they exploit it. Anyone, we can go back to George W. Bush and his crusade. What a poor word to use. We've got many examples.
Really cover it, does it?
No, but we've got many examples where they're saying, look, they're attacking you, and they're attacking your communities, and you're attacking your way of life, and then they use the religious connotations to try and support this narrative they've got, and try and distort that narrative. And I think it's really important. I totally agree. Let's get down to the grassroots levels. Let's get the message of what Prevent is all about. It's not spying on Muslims. It's not spying on students. It's not spying on school children. It's not making educators suddenly becoming on those using surveillance. Let's get the message out. It's about non-violent extremism right across the board, ideological, political, whatever it is.
And Julie Lenarz, what do you think needs to be done, needs to be said, needs to be written, needs to be presented to people to convince those who are still firmly convinced that we invited this upon ourselves?
Well, I would encourage people to just look at the evidence. I mean, we are not the only ones being targeted by Islamist extremism. I mean, these people carrying out attacks all across the world. To look at Bangladesh as a recent example, I mean, we've seen a killing spree where secularist, atheist activists have been mass slaughtered, literally cut apart. by these extremists, how are you going to relate that back to Western foreign policy, or how do you explain the enslavement of Yazidi women and girls in Iraq with Western foreign policy? These people have never done anything. They're an ancient, peaceful community. If you blame everything on Western foreign policy, it only gets you so far, but it never really adequately goes down to the root causes of this problem. So I would encourage everyone to really look at the evidence and then think this through and say, okay, this really doesn't explain this very accurately, does it?
Yeah, I think Julia has a great point there, Sheila. I mean, if you look at these groups, Islamic State or these, or even Al-Qaeda, but you look at Islamic State, they're an extreme Salafist group, and let's look at who they're killing. Shia Muslims. They're killing...
in Iraq, 300
yeah,
weeks ago.
That bombing was just horrendous. Kurds are Muslims. They have killed more Muslims than anyone else. They attack Muslims, and yet this is where we've got to get this dialogue back again to say this is not against Muslims, this is against groups like Islamic State, and these groups are killing more Muslims than they're killing Christians, Jews or anyone else. Let's get this perspective in of what this group is about.
I mentioned the Chilcot report at the very beginning, and Maajid Nawaz, I'll bring you back in on this. I'm just going to read a section of what Sir John Chilcot said in the report on this very question of inviting it upon ourselves, the Iraq war causing the Islamist terror that we see. He said, and I'm quoting, "The conflict in Iraq fitted easily into the jihadists' single narrative that a Zionist Christian alliance was waging a war against Islam, and that Muslims must therefore take up arms against this alliance and its supporters, confirming the belief of extremists that Islam is under attack and needs to be defended using force. That reinforced the determination of terrorists who were already committed," that's key, already committed to attacking the West, and motivated others who were not. Do you agree with that, Maajid?
I think what's important to mention in regards to what you've just read is that some of the language that George Bush used, such as the word crusade, could almost certainly have been construed by ordinary Muslims as being a clash of civilizations, kind of war against Islam, because of the historical connotations of that word. Having said that, we've got to be careful here of what I call the narrative, and Julie previously referred to this, and that is, look, at the end of the day, whatever we do, whether it's intervening in Syria or not intervening in Syria, Islamist jihadists will use our action or inaction to bolster their narrative. And the example was given. Our inaction in Syria was used by ISIS to say, see, nobody else cares for you, Muslims of Syria. We're the only ones defending you on the front lines. Come and join us. And then when we intervened to save the Yazidis from genocide, that same group turned around and said, see, these are the imperialist West intervening and invading your lands. Come and join us because we're going to resist them. This is what I call the narrative. We can't not do the right thing, worrying that in doing so, somehow we're going to be aiding ISIS narrative. We have to do the right thing for its own sake. So I happen to have opposed Bush's invasion of Iraq, but I opposed it on human rights grounds, not because I worried that Al-Qaeda would somehow use it or not use it. Likewise, I supported the intervention to save the Yazidi people from genocide in Syria and Iraq, again, not because I worried about how ISIS would use it, but because of the human rights implications of supporting the Yazidi people. So we have to act on principle, not on what Al-Qaeda will think.
Julie Lenarz, how concerned are you that part of that quote from Chilcot that I read out talked about confirming the belief of extremists that Islam was under attack and needed to be defended using force? It seems to me that every time an innocent, perfectly ordinary Muslim person on the streets of Britain, France, anywhere, every time they have a finger pointed at them or worse still are attacked, you're doing the terrorist bidding, aren't you? You're creating division.
Yes, well,
Not you, sorry. One is. People are.
Well, it certainly doesn't make any sense to sort of frame this debate as us versus Muslims. That's, of course, completely wrong. That said, it's also completely wrong to deny any link between Islam and the problems that we are facing. And I can only repeat myself, said that many times before. The moment you deny any link between the violence that we see and the religion, you are actually aiding the extremists and you're undermining the reformists. Because if you say this has nothing to do with the religion, you are taking away the justification of those within the Muslim world who want to make a difference as to why they want to make a difference. If you deny there are any problems, if there are any links, how can you justify reform? I think that is very, very important, that by making that link, and making very clear that we are referring to a very particular, very fundamentalist interpretation of Islam and not all of Islam, that you are not automatically stigmatizing all Muslims, but you're pointing the finger at those who are culpable, and you are allying with those in the Muslim world who want to bring this to an end, just like everyone else here wants to bring this to an end.
Julie, thank you for that point, because there are those within all of this who are deeply embedded in Islam, whether we like it or not. Julie, thank you. Julie Lenarz, Executive Director at Human Security Centre, and Maajid Nawaz, thanks as well, Chairman and Founder of the Quilliam Foundation, who advised the government on counter-extremism.